The 12 Chairs by Ilf and Petrov. Chapter 8. The Bashful Chiseler. The assistant warden of the second home of Stargorod Social Security Administration was a shy little thief. His whole being protested against stealing, yet it was impossible for him not to steal. He stole and was ashamed of himself. He stole constantly and was constantly ashamed of himself, which was why his smoothly shaven cheeks always burned with a blush of confusion, shame, bashfulness, and embarrassment. The assistant warden's name was Alexander Yakovlevich, and his wife's name was Alexandra Yakovlevna. He used to call her Sashchen, and she used to call him Alchen. The world has never seen such a bashful chiseler as Alexander Yakovlevich. He was not only the assistant warden, but also the chief warden. The previous one had been dismissed for rudeness to the inmates and had been appointed conductor of a symphony orchestra. Alchen was completely different from his ill-bred boss. Under the system of fuller workdays, he took upon himself the running of the home, treating the pensioners with marked courtesy, and introducing important reforms and innovations. Ostap Bender pulled the heavy oak door of the Vorobianinov home and found himself in the hall. There was a smell of burnt porridge. From the upstairs rooms came the confused sound of voices, like a distant hooray from a line of troops. There was no one about, and no one appeared. An oak staircase with 2 flights of once lacquered stairs led upward. Only the rings were now left. There was no sign of the stair rods that had once held the carpet in place. "The Comanche chief lived in vulgar luxury," thought Ostap as he went upstairs. In the first room, which was spacious and light, 15 or so old women in dresses made of the cheapest mouse-gray woolen cloth were sitting in a circle. Craning their necks and keeping their eyes on a healthy-looking man in the middle, the old women were singing. "We hear the sound of distant jingling, the troika's on its round, far into the distant stretches, the sparkling, snowy ground." The choir master, wearing a shirt and trousers of the same mouse-gray material, was beating time with both hands, and turning from side to side, kept shouting, "Descants, softer! Kukoshin, not so loud!" He caught sight of Ostap, but unable to restrain the movement of his hands, merely glanced at the newcomer and continued conducting. The choir increased its volume with an effort, as though singing through a pillow. Ta-ta-ta, 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 tararum, tararum, tararum. "Can you tell me where I can find the assistant warden?" asked Ostap, breaking into the first pause. "What do you want, comrade?" Ostap shook the conductor's hand and inquired amiably, "National folk songs? Very interesting. I'm the fire inspector." The assistant warden looked ashamed. Yes, he said with embarrassment. "Very opportune. I was actually going to write you a report." "There's nothing to worry about," said Ostap magnanimously. "I'll write the report myself. Let's take a look at the premises." Alchen dismissed the choir with a wave of his hand, and the old women made off with little steps of delight. "Come this way," invited the assistant warden. Before going any further, Ostap scrutinized the furniture in the first room. It consisted of a table, 2 garden benches with iron legs, one of them had the name Nicky carved on the back, and a light brown harmonium. "Do they use Primus stoves or anything of that kind in this room?" No, this is where our recreational activities are held. We have a choir and drama, painting, drawing, and music circles." When he reached the word music, Alexander Yakovlevich blushed. First his chin turned red, then his forehead and cheeks. Alchen felt very ashamed. He had sold all the instruments belonging to the wind section a long time before. The feeble lungs of the old women had never produced anything more than a puppy-like squeak from them anyway. It was ridiculous to see such a mass of metal in so helpless a condition. Alchen had not been able to resist selling the wind section, and now he felt very guilty. A slogan written in large letters on a piece of the same mouse-gray woolen cloth spanned the wall between the windows. It said, "A brass band is the path to collective creativity." "Very good," said Ostap. "This recreation room does not constitute a fire hazard. Let's go on." Passing through the front doors of Vorobianinov's house, Ostap could see no sign of a walnut chair with curved legs and English chintz upholstery. The iron-smooth walls were plastered with directives issued to the second home. Ostap read them and from time to time asked enthusiastically, "Are the chimneys swept regularly? Are the stoves working properly?" and receiving exhaustive answers, moved on. The fire inspector made a diligent search for at least one corner of the house which might constitute a fire hazard, but in that respect everything seemed to be in order. His second quest, however, was less successful. Ostap went into the dormitories. As he appeared, the old women stood up and bowed low. The rooms contained beds covered with blankets as hairy as a dog's coat, with the word "feet" woven at one end. Below the beds were trunks, which at the initiative of Alexander Yakovlevitch, who liked to do things in a military fashion, projected exactly 1/3 of their length. Everything in the home was marked by its extreme modesty. The furniture, that consisted solely of garden benches taken from Alexander Boulevard, now renamed in honor of the Proletarian Voluntary Saturdays, the paraffin lamps bought at the local market, and the very blankets with that frightening word, "feet." One feature of the house, however, had been made to last and was developed on a grand scale, to wit, the door springs. Door springs were Alexander Yakovlevitch's passion. Sparing no effort, he fitted all the doors in the house with springs of different types and systems. There were very simple ones in the form of an iron rod, compressed air ones with cylindrical brass pistons. There were ones with pulleys that raised and lowered heavy bags of shot. There were springs which were so complex in design that the local mechanic could only shake his head in wonder. And all the cylinder springs and counterweights were very powerful, slamming doors shut with the swiftness of a mousetrap. Whenever the mechanisms operated, the whole house shook. With pitiful squeals, the old women tried to escape the onslaught of the doors, but not always with success. The doors gave the fugitives a thump on the back, and at the same time a counterweight shot past their ears with a dull rasping sound. As Bender and the assistant warden walked around the house, the doors fired a noisy salute. But the feudal magnificence had nothing to hide. The chair was not there. As the search progressed, the fire inspector found himself in the kitchen. Porridge was cooking in a large copper pot and gave off the smell that the smooth operator had noticed in the hall. Ostap wrinkled his nose and said, "What's it cooking in? Lubricating oil?" "It's pure butter, I swear it," said Alchen, blushing to the roots of his hair. "We buy it from a farm." He felt very ashamed. "Anyway, it's not a fire risk," observed Ostap. The chair was not in the kitchen either. There was only a stool occupied by the cook, wearing a cap and apron of mouse-gray woolen material. "Why is everybody's clothing gray? That cloth isn't even fit to wipe the windows with." The shy Alchen was even more embarrassed. "We don't receive enough funds." He was disgusted with himself. Ostap looked at him disbelievingly and said, "That is no concern of the fire brigade, which I am at present representing." Alchen was alarmed. "We've taken all the necessary fire precautions," he declared. "We even have a fire extinguisher and a Claire." The fire inspector reluctantly proceeded in the direction of the fire extinguisher, peeping into the lumber rooms as he went. The red iron nose of the extinguisher caused the inspector particular annoyance, despite the fact that it was the only object in the house which had any connection with fire precautions. "Where did you get it? At the market?" And without waiting for an answer from the thunderstruck Alexander Yakovlevitch, he removed the eclair from the rusty nail on which it was hanging, broke the capsule without warning, and quickly pointed the nose in the air. But instead of the expected stream of foam, all that came out was a high-pitched hissing which sounded like the ancient hymn, "How Glorious is Our Lord on Zion." "You obviously did get it at the market," said Ostap, his earlier opinion confirmed. And he put back the fire extinguisher, which was still hissing, in its place. They moved on, accompanied by the hissing. "Where can it be?" wondered Ostap. "I don't like the look of things." And he made up his mind not to leave the place until he had found out the truth. While the fire inspector and the assistant warden were crawling about the attics, considering fire precautions in detail and examining the chimneys, the second home of the Stargorod Social Security Administration carried on its daily routine. Dinner was ready. The smell of burnt porridge had appreciably increased, and it overpowered all the sourish smells inhabiting the house. There was a rustling in the corridors. Holding iron bowls full of porridge in front of them with both hands, the old women cautiously emerged from the kitchen and sat down at a large table, trying not to look at the refectory slogans composed by Alexander Yakovlevitch and painted by his wife. The slogans read, "Food is the source of health. One egg contains as much fat as a half-pound of meat. By carefully masticating your food, you help society. Meat is bad for you." These sacred words aroused in the old lady's memories of teeth that had disappeared before the Revolution, eggs that had been lost at approximately the same time, meat that was inferior to eggs in fat, and perhaps even the society that they were prevented from helping by careful mastication. Seated at table in addition to the old women were Isidore, Afanasi, Cyril, and Oleg, and also Pasha Emelovich. Neither in age nor sex did these young men fit into the pattern of Social Security, but they were the younger brothers of Alchen, and Pasha Emelovich was Alexandra Yakovlevna's cousin once removed. The young men, the oldest of whom was the 32-year-old Pasha Emelovich, did not consider their life in the pensioners' home in any way abnormal. They lived on the same basis as the old women. They too had government property beds and blankets with the word feet. They were clothed in the same mouse-gray material as the old women, but on account of their youth and strength they ate better than the latter. They stole everything in the house that Alchen did not manage to steal himself. Pasha could put away 4 pounds of fish at one go, and he once did so, leaving the home dinnerless. Hardly had the old women had time to taste their porridge when the younger brothers and Pasha Emilovich rose from the table, having gobbled down their share, and went belching into the kitchen to look for something more digestible. The meal continued. The old women began jabbering. Now they'll stuff themselves full and start bawling songs. Pasha Emilovich sold the chair from the recreation room this morning. A second-hand dealer took it away at the back door. Just you see, he'll come home drunk tonight. At this moment the pensioners' conversation was interrupted by a trumpeting noise that even drowned the hissing of the fire extinguisher, and a husky voice began, "Wünschen." The old women hunched their shoulders and, ignoring the loudspeaker in the corner on the floor, continued eating in the hope that fate would spare them. But the loudspeaker cheerfully went on, "Crash visitor valuable invention. Railwayman of the Murmansk Railway, Comrade Sokotsky, Samara, O. Arayo, K. Kaliningrad, U. Yoros, T.S. Sirensita, K. Kaliningrad, Y. York, Sokotsky." The trumpet wheezed and renewed the broadcast in a thick voice. "Invented a system of signal lights for snowplows. The invention has been approved by Dorizol." The old women floated away to their rooms like gray ducklings. The loudspeaker, jigging up and down by its own power, blared away into the empty room. "And we will now play some Novgorod folk music." Far, far away in the center of the earth, someone strummed a balalaika, and a black earth batisini broke into song. On the wall the bugs were sitting, blinking at the sky. Then they saw the tax inspector and crawled away to die. In the center of the earth, the verses brought forth a storm of activity. A horrible gurgling was heard from the loudspeaker. It was something between thunderous applause and the eruption of an underground volcano. Meanwhile, the disheartened fire inspector had descended an attic ladder backwards and was now back in the kitchen, where he saw 5 citizens digging into a barrel of sauerkraut and bolting it down. They ate in silence. Pasha Emilovich alone waggled his head in the style of an Epicurean, and wiping some strings of cabbage from his mustache, observed, "It's a sin to eat cabbage like this without vodka." "Is this a new intake of women?" asked Ostap. "They're orphans," replied Alchen, shouldering the inspector out of the kitchen and surreptitiously shaking his fist at the orphans. "Children of the Volga region?" Alchen was confused. "A trying heritage from the Tsarist regime." Alchen spread his arms as much as to say, "There's nothing you can do with a heritage like that." "Co-education by the composite method?" Without further hesitation, the bashful Alchen invited the fire inspector to take potluck and lunch with him. Potluck that day happened to be a bottle of Zubrovka vodka, home-pickled mushrooms, minced herring, Ukrainian beet soup containing first-grade meat, chicken and rice, and stewed apples. "Seshchen," said Alexander Yakovlevich, "I want you to meet a comrade from the Province Fire Precaution Administration." Ostap made his hostess a theatrical bow and paid her such an interminable and ambiguous compliment that he could hardly get to the end of it. Sashchen, a buxom woman whose good looks were somewhat marred by sideburns of the kind that Tsar Nicholas used to have, laughed softly and took a drink with the 2 men. "Here's to your communal services!" exclaimed Ostap. The lunch went off gaily, and it was not until they reached the stewed fruit that Ostap remembered the point of his visit.
"Why is it," he asked, "that the furnishings are so skimpy in your establishment?"
"What do you mean?" said Alchin. "What about the harmonium?"
"Yes, I know, vox humana, but you have absolutely nothing of all of any taste to sit on, only garden benches."
"There's a chair in the recreation room," said Alchin in an offended tone. "An English chair. They say it was left over from the original furniture."
"By the way, I didn't see your recreation room. How is it from the point of view of fire hazard? It won't let you down, I hope. I had better see it."
"Certainly." Ostap thanked his hostess for the lunch and left. No primus was used in the recreation room. There was no portable stove of any kind. The chimneys were in good state of repair and were cleaned regularly. But the chair, to the incredulity of Alchin, was missing. They ran to look for it. They looked under the beds and under the trunks. For some reason or other they moved back to the harmonium. They questioned the old women, who kept looking at Pasha Emilovich timidly, but the chair was just not there. Pasha Emilovich himself showed great enthusiasm for the search. When all had calmed down, Pasha still kept wandering from room to room, looking under decanters, shifting iron teaspoons, and muttering, "Where can it be? I saw it myself this morning. It's ridiculous."
"It's depressing, girls," said Ostap in an icy voice.
"It's absolutely ridiculous," repeated Pasha Emilovich impudently. At this point, however, the Eclair fire extinguisher, which had been hissing the whole time, took a high F, which only the people's artist Nezhdanova can do, stopped for a second, and then emitted its first stream of foam, which soaked the ceiling and knocked the cook's cap off. The first stream of foam was followed by another, mouse gray in color, which bowled over young Isidor Yakovlevich. After that, the extinguisher began working smoothly. Pasha Emilovich, Alchin, and all the surviving brothers raced to the spot.
"Well done," said Ostap. "An idiotic invention."
As soon as the old women were left alone with Ostap and without the boss, they at once began complaining. "He's brought his family into the home. They eat up everything. The piglets get milk and we get porridge. He's taken everything out of the house."
"Take it easy, girls," said Ostap, retreating. "You need someone from the Labor Inspection Department. The Senate hasn't empowered me."
The old women were not listening. "And the Pasha Milentovich, he went and sold a chair today. I saw him myself."
"Who did he sell it to?"
asked Ostap quickly. "He sold it, that's all. He was going to steal my blanket." A fierce struggle was going on in the corridor, but mind finally triumphed over matter, and the extinguisher, trampled under Pasha Emilovich's feet of iron, gave a last dribble and was silent forever. The old women were sent to clean the floor. Lowering his head and waddling slightly, the fire inspector went up to Pasha Emilovich.
"A friend of mine," began Ostap importantly, "also used to sell government property. He now lives a monastic life in the penitentiary."
"I find your groundless accusations strange," said Pasha, who smelled strongly of foam.
"Who did you sell the chair to?"
asked Ostap in a ringing whisper. Pasha Emilovich, who had supernatural understanding, realized at this point he was about to be beaten, if not kicked. "To a second-hand dealer."
"What's his address?"
"I'd never seen him before." "Never?" "No, honestly."
"I ought to bust you in the mouth," said Ostap dreamily. "Only Zarathustra wouldn't allow it. Get the hell out of here!"
Pasha Emilovich grinned fawningly and began walking away.
"Come back, you abortion!" cried Ostap haughtily. "What was the dealer like?"
Pasha Emilovich described him in detail while Ostap listened carefully. The interview was concluded by Ostap with the words,
"This clearly has nothing to do with fire precautions."
In the corridor, the bashful Alchin went up to Ostap and gave him a gold piece.
"That comes under Article 114 of the Criminal Code," said Ostap, "bribing officials in the course of their duty."
Nevertheless, he took the money, and without saying goodbye, went towards the door. The door, which was fitted with a powerful contraption, opened with an effort and gave Ostap a 1.5-ton shove in the backside.
"Good shot," said Ostap, rubbing the affected part. "The hearing is continued."